talk about a common topic that is often seen for the purposes of AP biology or just biology in general, and that is understanding the Hardy-Weinberg equation. The Hardy-Weinberg equation is a topic that comes up in later units, so around 7 and 8, near natural selection for the AP biology understanding. However, it's safe to understand that this topic may come up because understanding how to solve a math problem in terms of biology can be very difficult for many students. So understanding the purposes of the Hardy-Weinberg equation is important. So first, let's go over the conditions that suffice before we talk about a Hardy-Weinberg equation, because while this question might be a multiple choice question, Hardy-Weinberg equations or equilibrium assumes that you understand what the conditions are. If these conditions are not met, then we can't utilize the equations listed here to adjust for understanding the Hardy-Weinberg equation. So let's talk about those conditions first. The first thing that we want to note for the Hardy-Weinberg equation is we need to have an infinitely large population. So an infinitely large population is very important to understand because having a large population, meaning that there's enough individuals that suffice within that given area. So you can't have, for example, two birds and assume that they're going to mate and that consumes a population. It's not big enough. We need to have a strong enough population. And the reason why is we want to eliminate the possibility of genetic drift. So we want to eliminate the possibility of genetic drift. So let me see here. We want to write out that genetic drift is a no-go. We don't want that when there is a small population. And so if you have genetic drift, it's a no-go for Hardy-Weinberg equation to occur. Therefore, if you have something like genetic drift, which means it's a small enough population, Hardy-Weinberg equation does not suffice. So we do not want that to occur. So that's the first condition that will not work in this scenario that we don't want to see continue on. So let's now talk about another condition with the Hardy-Weinberg equation. And what the second condition is, we have to ensure that they're talking about genotypes. And genotypes means the genetic makeup. And those genotypes have to be equal. We have to give equal chance. So there has to be equality with both genotypes. And so what that means, they have to be able to reproduce properly. And what I mean by reproduce properly is that we have to have a high chance of survival. And this means that we cannot have, and this is the big underlining thing, we can't have natural selection. Because natural selection means what? Survival of the fittest. And if we have natural selection, then we're assuming that only certain individuals within a population will survive and certain individuals that are fit will reproduce. It's not giving everybody in that individual group or population a fair chance of survival. And therefore, we can't go ahead and say that natural selection can be assumed in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium problems. So that can't occur. So no natural selection can occur for a situation like this. So we have to assume that all genotypes have an equal chance in this case. There are other conditions as well. The next condition I want to talk about, so first we have infinitely large population, no natural selection, and next we can't have no mutations. No mutations, because we can't assume that there's something going to occur that is outside of this scenario that can alter the two frequencies and the alleles, the genetic code. The genetic code is written in such a way that it's the perfect conditions. And if we have mutations that are involved, what happens is now we're altering these two frequencies. We're altering the frequencies at which these two equations can work. We want to have perfect conditions, and having mutations doesn't allow that. So no mutations whatsoever in this perfect scenario. I call the Hardy-Weinberg equation the perfect scenario in which situations can occur. And that'll help you remember the conditions, that you have to have a perfectly large population and no natural selection and no mutation, which leads to the next thing, which is no gene flow. No gene flow. And so a lot of people think, okay, wait. So no gene flow. What does that mean? So that means in a perfect condition, we don't want to have outside mutations, and we don't want to have, remember, we don't want outside mutations. We don't want natural selection. We want infinitely large population, which means, once again, it means it's a perfect condition. So circling back to gene flow, that means that we want to know what our population is. Say this is island A and this is island B, and these are two sets of birds. We want to be sure that we have the birds in this vicinity, and we're not taking account for the birds moving to different, kumbaya locations. We don't want that happening. We just want to worry about our one island and our one area and the select population there. So we want no gene flow. No gene flow, no gene flow, no gene flow. So that's the next thing. And lastly, for Hardy-Weinberg equation to occur, we want random mating. We want random mating. So we want to ensure that individuals pair by chance. So it's all about chance and not according to survival of the fittest, not according to genotypes and phenotypes. So if we were taking a look at individuals, we wouldn't want tall people to go ahead and mate with only tall people. We want to give the randomness of the situation, which gives every individual in that given population a chance, a fair chance at this scenario. So those are the conditions. That's just a side rule that we want to note when we might be addressing the Hardy-Weinberg equation. So let's talk about the two equations that do come up so you can better understand the idea itself and what it comes down to. So let's take a look at these two equations here, because that will help us understand. So let's take a look at what P means and what Q means for us. So P and Q are two letters, but if you remember in algebra, P means that it is the dominant allele. So oftentimes it's designated as the dominant. You can also think of it as the first letter of the alphabet. So that's oftentimes why P is usually the dominant allele. And if you're wondering what allele means, if you remember when you're doing Punnett squares, the one individual letter is an allele, and the alleles together can make the genetic makeup. So for example, let's take a look at, if you want to take a look at an individual that might be heterozygous for brown eyes, so big B, little b, and someone that might be blue eyes, they might be homozygous recessive, but the alleles are either the little b's or the big B's. But genotypically, for example, this brown-eyed individual has brown eyes. So genotypically, they show up as brown, even though they have an allele for that recessive allele, because the genetic makeup is they express brown eyes. So that is the difference between allele versus genotype. So let's pivot back. So we have dominant alleles for P, and then for the Q, we have the recessive allele. Okay, so when we're looking at the frequency of alleles, we are looking at this first equation right here, the frequency alleles equation. So those, though, you can think of as the big B versus the little b. Now we want to take a look at whether or not they could be homozygous recessive. I mean, homozygous dominant, I should start off with. So that would be like two big B's, whether or not they're going to be heterozygous, so big B, little b, or whether or not they're going to be homozygous recessive. And so that would be two little b's. And that's where the frequency of genotypes come in, because P squared is the same thing as saying the frequency of homozygous dominant, like the two big B's. Heterozygous would be the equivalent of 2PQ. So that would be the frequency of heterozygous genotype. And little b, or the B's, two little B's, or we said the blue-eyed individual would be considered homozygous recessive. And that would be equivalent to Q squared. All of these combined together give the value of 1. Okay, so now that you've taken a look at the different types of equations, take a moment to read the question here, and we will gather or pause your computer. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the following different notes, so that way you could just read the question fully, and just take your time and read in full detail what it's saying. So take a minute and pause your computer and go ahead and take a minute to read the question here. Okay, now that you're done reading the question. As you can see here, it's a multiple choice question. And they give you some things here. They tell you the frequency of blue, or the recessive allele, is 0.6. And then they tell you the frequency of a yellow allele is 0.4. Now this is kind of confusing because the letters are designated differently, but basically what they're saying is P, which is the frequency of the yellow color, is equivalent to 0.4. And the Q, which is the blue color, is equivalent to 0.6. And this should make sense if these are the only two alleles, because remember, this has to total up to 1. So 0.6 plus 0.4 is equivalent to 1. So that, as a check process, makes sense to add up to that first equation. Now let's take a look at what they're asking. They're asking for the heterozygous individuals in the population. So they're not asking for homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. So they're not talking about P squared or Q squared at this moment. They're talking about the heterozygous individuals, so the 2PQ. So doing a little bit of math, you want to go ahead and multiply all of them out to get 2 times 0.4, because that's what we have for the P, times the Q, which is 0.6, to go ahead and, if you type it in your calculator, get 0.48. Now remember, it talks about percentages, which makes sense because all our answer choices are in percentages. Now, if you were taking the actual test here, I would in my head know to take the decimal place, move it 2 spaces to the right because I'm timesing it by 100 to get my percentage. That would be the fast way to do it. And then note that the answer is C. If you want to go ahead and check if you had time and now you're practicing, you can go ahead and type in 0.48 or 0.48 times 100 and see too that it gives you 48% or the answer choice C. Now, if you wanted to really check your answer, you could type in 0.48 times p squared. So that would be zero point 0.4 squared plus, so you're going to be 0.4 squared plus 0.48 plus q squared, which is 0.6 squared. And that should give you 1 because it would answer to the frequency of genotypes of individuals in that second equation. If you had the time to do that. In this case, in this specific problem, we're just assuming that it is testing scenario. And therefore, when you add it in, you always want to use the best of your time. So once you have the answer, go ahead and collect your answer thought for C because that is the correct answer. Some testing tips that you should be aware of is when you're looking at extreme answers, be careful. Your eyes are automatically drawn immediately to answer choice A and answer choice D. That doesn't mean that on testing day that those can't be answers, but just be very careful when you're reviewing test notes or when you're reviewing practice problems because you have a tendency to gravitate your eyes to those answer choices before actually making a selection of an answer. So make sure you review that thought process before selecting an answer. We hope you enjoyed this testing tip and reviewing one question like this that might be provided on a studying of the Hardy-Weinberg equation. If you like questions like these, make sure to subscribe or check links down below for different testing strategies, tips, and tricks with multiple choice questions, free response questions, or other testing prep choices that you can find with products down below. Some are free, some are reduced price, but take some time to review those. And once again, if you want some time to review problems like these, we will be posting new videos at least once a month, so make sure to subscribe to the channel.